I'm outta here. I'm outta here.
Okay, so Syracuse and Pittsburgh are not quite out of the Big East yet, but at this time next year they will be because they'll both be in the ACC in 2013. West Virginia, they're already in the Big 12. The Big East, no question, is never going to be seen in the same category as the SEC, the Big 12, the ACC, the Big 10, and the Pac-12. But the one thing that the Big East has been able to do over the past couple years, their conference champion has not really been determined until the final Saturday of the year. Saw that 2 years ago with UConn, and then last year with West Virginia getting the tiebreak over Louisville and Cincinnati. But, of course, West Virginia now out of the Big East. It appears that this league is more wide open than ever. So let's go ahead and begin our Big East preview for 2012. We'll begin first with a team that used to play in this league, then left, and now they're back. The Temple Owls, that's right, Bill Cosby's alma mater, makes a return to the Big East. They were there 7 years ago. They played in the Mid-American Conference recently and did well, and last year won 9 games. But they have a lot of bodies to replace. And that will definitely include the passing attack, which last year wasn't that good anyway. Last season, Temple was 116th in the country in passing. The ground game, though, was fairly effective, running the option, the spread option attack, which this year they will remain with it, even with new offensive coordinator Ryan Day. Quarterback Chris Coyer comes back along with backup running back Matt Brown, who now assumes the role as the #1 tailback for the Owls. On the defensive side, well, Temple last season didn't do too bad. They had 4 All-MAC players who unfortunately aren't there this year. They've moved on. 6 starters come back, but then again, they lost most of that production from a year ago that helped them so much. Justin Gildia is back at a strong safety. He can do pretty much a little bit of everything. And Hakeem Smith, the only notable linebacker back from a year ago. So I would expect Temple's defense to take a step back this year. Last year, only LSU and Alabama gave up fewer points than Temple. But again, you've lost a lot of talent on that side of the ball, so I would not expect the Owls to be the same. The schedule, not bad in September, Maryland, and you play at Penn State, and Penn State, has to feel a little depleted with probation and not knowing who's coming back. And then after you play South Florida at home, 3 of the next 4 are on the road. For Temple, I do think they digress somewhat because it's an upgrade in the league from going from the MAC to the Big East, plus due to the fact that you have a lot of bodies to replace. So I would expect Temple to finish at the bottom of the league. Well, you remember the game Musical Chairs growing up as a kid. I loved the game. But if you're at Pittsburgh, it's been the game of coaching musical chairs, as in who's the head coach going to be. 2 years ago, Dave Wannstedt was forced out. They had another coach who didn't even get to coach because of domestic violence issues. And then the most recent coach, that was Todd Graham, only there 1 year, decided to leave town and go to Arizona State. So now Paul Chryst, the former Wisconsin offensive coordinator, will take over a Pittsburgh squad that really, I think, blends in well with his coaching. In other words, Wisconsin was known for terrific ground attacks. Well, Pittsburgh, their strength is running the ball, and Ray Graham is back for the Panthers, and apparently he's healthy. Last year, second in the league in rushing, and then the devastating knee injury that sidelined him for a good part of the year. So if he looks like the Ray Graham of last year, Pittsburgh's running attack will be fine, and Isaac Bennett is a pretty good backup as well. So they've got a nice 1-2 punch in the backfield in Pittsburgh. And the big thing for Pittsburgh is going to be protecting the quarterback. Last season, nobody in football gave up more sacks than Pittsburgh. They gave up 64 total. The defense will have a new look. It'll be a 4-3 look with defensive tackle Aaron Donald, one of the best interior players in the league. He's back along with free safety Jared Hawley. I would look for Pittsburgh this year to be in the middle of the pack because I do think their ground game will be fine. If they can get some improvement from the offensive front, they'll be okay too. The schedule, play early at Cincinnati. That is a must-win. I don't foresee the Panthers winning the Big East if they can't win that opener because you still have Rutgers, South Florida, and Louisville down the road. So Pittsburgh has to win that early game at Cincinnati. I think the Panthers will finish 4th, but I don't trust the passing game, and that's a big reason why, along with the offensive line play from a year ago, that I don't think Pittsburgh wins the league. But I do think they'll get to a bowl game. Well, 2 seasons ago, Syracuse won the Pinstripe Bowl, beating Kansas State, but that momentum quickly deflated into 2011, primarily because The Orange, well, they looked flat down the stretch, especially on pass defense, finishing the year at 5-7 and out of bowl contention. This year's team does return to QB in Ryan Nassib, and it does help that he'll have a pretty good target coming back in the form of Alec Lemon. Left tackle, one of the best in the league in Justin Pugh, a two-time All-Big East player, is also back. So at least from the blind side, Nassib will have protection. But the ground attack last year for Syracuse, that was one of their strengths. They lose a 1,000-yard rusher entering this season. So they've got to find some adequate help in the backfield. Offensive line, a little unproven. Defensively, looking at the Orange, last season it stunk. Dead last in the Big East, giving up an average of 29 points a game. The linebacking core looks pretty experienced. Also a pretty good strong safety in Shamarko Thomas. But, again, the issue last year for Syracuse, couldn't get to the quarterback, couldn't force enough turnovers. And Syracuse, it felt like their defense could never get off the field, especially during the latter part of the schedule. And Syracuse, speaking of schedule, it will be enormous. Northwestern, pretty good team. You play them to start the year. Then you play at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey against one of the top teams in the country in USC. There's a loss right there. And then later in the year, you play at Missouri. Haven't even gotten to the teeth of the Big East schedule yet, but you have to deal with that too. Overall, Syracuse only gets 3 home games and only 5 games total at the Carrier Dome. So I think for Syracuse, it's going to be kind of the same as last season. They've got to show some terrific improvement on defense, and also they have to compensate for losing their best rusher from a year ago. I don't know if they can get all that done in 1 year. I would expect the Orange to be a 4-8 or 5-7 type team in this their last year in the Big East. And moving on to Cincinnati. 3-way tie last year for the league championship, but lost out on the tie break to West Virginia. Entering this year, Coach Butch Jones, you know that he has got to be scratching his head thinking, what am I going to do for quarterback? What am I going to do for running back? Because for the last 2 years, it's been Zach Collaros at quarterback and Isaiah Peed as his running back. The Bearcats definitely were able to move the ball a lot on the ground because Collaros was not just a good thrower, but also he could really get out of the pocket in tight situations. So they have to replace both Collaros and Peed, who last season was a 1,000-yard rusher, and hoping to do that will be George Wynn for the Bearcats. Their best receiver returns in the form of Anthony McClurg. Defensively last year, the Bearcats were very tough against the run, but just like the offense, the defense loses some talent on that side of the ball, including most of their defensive line. And that really hurts because, again, stopping the run was Cincinnati's forte in 2011. The linebacking core, though, at least will have experience with Nick Temple as well as Malik Bomar. So Cincinnati, I think they'll be okay on defense, but because the line is going to be fairly new, I don't foresee them being as good. The Cincinnati schedule, as we mentioned earlier with Pittsburgh, the early game at home against Pittsburgh for Cincinnati, that could very well be an elimination game as far as contending for the Big East Championship. So I think that's almost a must-win for the Bearcats. And then you look at later in the year, just like Pittsburgh, Cincinnati will play Virginia Tech, but that game will be at Landover, Maryland. And then October 20th at Louisville, an enormous game for Cincinnati. The Bearcats, in my opinion, are going to be a 6-7 win type team, and they're probably going to finish 4th or 5th in that same category as Pittsburgh. So I do foresee them going to a minor bowl game, but I don't foresee them finishing any higher than 4th in the league. Moving on to UConn. 2 years ago, the Huskies went to a major bowl game. Last year, they didn't go bowling, period. No doubt they missed Randy Edsall, the head coach, who helped them get to a pretty respectable level. But Paul Pasqualoni's first year at UConn led to a 5-7 record. On the defensive side, look, they're going to be pretty good, returning most of their starters, including the linebacker C.O. Moore, as well as defensive end Trevorrow Williams. Those are 2 dandies on the defensive side for UConn. But the concerns on defense for UConn I have are going to be at the tackles and at the safeties, inexperience there. Offensively, they got to find a quarterback, and I think that's going to be one of the big weaknesses this year for UConn. Law McCombs, he's back to the running back position, and Michael Smith, a receiver they can count on, he returns as well. For Connecticut, the schedule really does not play out well. The three toughest opponents in this league, in my opinion, are Rutgers, Louisville, and South Florida. Well, UConn has to play all three away from home. And early on, there's a nice test against a team that I think is underrated in North Carolina State. Connecticut, because of their defense, is going to be in ball games, but because their offense, I don't think is very good. I think that they are going to finish with a losing record, probably the same as last year at 5-7. And I think Pasqualoni entering next season is going to have a lot of heat on him. I foresee Connecticut finishing 7th in the league. Greg Schiano, what a terrific job he did at Rutgers in recent seasons, including last year guiding the team to 9 victories, including a bowl win. But he's moved on. He's now the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Kyle Flood occupies a position that Schiano did very well in New Jersey. For Rutgers, their offense returns a lot of key players. Quarterback, though, that's going to be the question mark. It's going to be a big battle for their QB. But as far as the Rutgers players coming back, some of the notables on offense will include Brandon Coleman at a wideout position, as well as Jawan Jamison. For Rutgers, I think the biggest key besides finding a good quarterback will be to increase their runs per carry. Last year, their ground game, largely ineffective, less than 3 yards a pop. Defensively, this is where Rutgers gets even, returning nearly everybody. In my opinion, Rutgers will have the best defense in all of the Big East, with Isaac Holmes back at defensive tackle, along with Kazim Green, a one-time safety, last year converted to linebacker, and he had over 130 tackles for the Scarlet Knights. Rutgers' schedule will feature an early matchup at South Florida. Rutgers can ill afford to lose that one. And then the following week, in late September, a pretty tough out-of-conference test against nationally rated Arkansas, that game at Fayetteville. Plus, you have to play at Cincinnati, at Louisville, and then toward the end of the year, a home game against Louisville. For Rutgers, because their defense is so darn good, they'll go back to a bowl game. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But the coaching change, as well as some question marks I have at quarterback and still unproven at ground attack, I don't think they're going to win the Big East Conference. It'll be a nice year, probably an 8-win season for Rutgers at best, but I don't foresee them getting past 3rd in the league. And let's move to Louisville, finishing a 3-way tie a year ago for the championship, but West Virginia got the tiebreak. Last season, he was just a freshman. Teddy Bridgewater, the quarterback for Louisville, and I thought he did a pretty adequate job. Now he's got a year of experience under his belt. People are now expecting more in the Louisville, Kentucky area. We'll see if he can deliver. And wide receiver, one of the best in the league, returns in Devontae Parker. And complimenting him also will be Michaele Harris as well. Looking at Louisville's defense, the biggest loss they're going to have to deal with is Dexter Heyman. Heyman last year was their team leader. Seems like he made plays all the time. He's moved on now. So Preston Brown will now occupy the position of being basically a team leader from the linebacking position. And then you look at the strong safety position, Hakeem Smith. I think he's going to have a pretty good year for Louisville as well. The schedule for the Cardinals will feature a nice couple of tests before they get into Big East play. That'll feature North Carolina at home and then at defending Conference USA champion Southern Miss. The schedule itself, though, mid-October showdown at Pittsburgh. Can't overlook the Panthers. And then maybe the game of the year in the Big East, a home game the following week, October 20th, against the South Florida Bulls, who we'll talk about in a second. Louisville also will get 4 of their 7 conference games at home, which will help. So it's really a nice schedule for Louisville, but they're still young in a lot of spots. I think it's going to be pretty close between them and South Florida, but I have the Cardinals finishing 2nd. Last season for the Bulls, it started off well. An upset win at Notre Dame. The team started 4-0, and then they fell off the face of the earth, losing 7 of their last 8, but most of those losses were by 6 points or less. In fact, I think the majority of them were by 3 points. So a lot of those games could have easily gone the other way. B.J. Daniels, who's been a QB at South Florida for well over 30 games now since his freshman year, returns one more season for the Bulls. Biggest thing about him, because he's got the tools to be something special, is going to be throwing consistency. That has to improve. In the backfield returning will be Demetrius Murray, along with wide receiver Andre Davis. The defensive side for South Florida, I think it looks pretty good. The defensive line, this should be one of the strengths of the team. And then at linebacker, D.D. Lattimore returns for USF. I think South Florida's defense will be fine. The secondary has to answer some questions. but I think they have enough veterans, and I think last year, losing a lot of those close games, I think will make them a better team this year. It was close for me to decide who was going to win the Big East, South Florida or Louisville. If you look at the South Florida schedule, I think they're going to be a little more battle-tested than Louisville because I think you've got games against Miami and then the late September game at home against Florida State. As long as USF doesn't get too banged up after that game, I think they're going to be fine. And I think for South Florida, the key will be getting consistency from B.J. Daniels. He's been there a while. I think South Florida has more veterans than Louisville. So I'm going to give the slight edge to South Florida to win the Big East and to finally get to a major bowl game. That's my look at the Big East Conference. We've got one more segment before we get into the Big 12, and that is Best of the Rest, which we'll talk about Notre Dame, BYU, and Boise State, and we might throw another team in there that's not a part of a BCS league that could have a nice season. We'll catch you next time.